Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Charvak podcast. This is your host, Kushal Mehra. Time for another episode of Shastrartha, and today is episode 15. And the title for today's episode is Perspectives Around Legal Age for Marriage. Now, let me just give you guys a brief background about why I have decided to conduct this decision. If you're on social media, or I don't know if you've just been following this, a few weeks or months ago, the government of India had started taking recommendations in for a very specific subject. And that subject was the government is looking to reconsider what should be the legally married age for both men and women in India. And the focus was especially on women, when I think even the Honorable Prime Minister of India had made some kind of a reference. Either it was on a video or through a tweet, I can't remember, so please don't quote me on that. It was something to do with the Prime Minister also talking about it, that we have a committee that is working on it. And I thought that this would be an amazing topic to have a discussion on, especially when it comes to what should be the legally married age for women in India. And I was trying to read different perspectives, and I'll be very honest over here. The prime mover for me in this case was Pratyasha and her wonderful thread on social media, where I was reading quite with a lot of interest what Pratyasha had to say on this topic. And then obviously I called Pratyasha and Padma and I told them, let's have a discussion on this subject. So once again, as always, Padma, Pratyasha, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast for the discussion.
Namaste. Namaste, everyone.
Hi, Kushal.
Okay, so just in case you're watching this for the first time, so let me explain the way we kind of hold the discussion. So normally what we try to do in this edition, which I like to call Shastrartha, is that we have guests who come, and every guest is given 10 to 15 minutes to make their opening arguments. And after that, what we do is we listen to their opening arguments, and later on we kind of feed off what the opening arguments were, and then we continue the discussion from there. And then if you guys are watching this live, you can use the super chat option and ask your questions live, and I can put them on to the guests who are there on the day. So Pratyasha, I'm going to start with you today. So obviously I read your thread, but I think there is a lot more to be said on this subject from your end. I'm pretty sure about it. That is beyond what you wrote on Twitter. So could you lay out your arguments, so when it comes to why you believe so? As we know, the current data states that the current legal age of marriage as per the Child Marriage Act of 2006 is 18 for women. Now, you had made some interesting points about if the government considers increasing that age, why it would be a good thing. So can you lay it out for us?
Yeah. Thank you, Kushal. This will most importantly turn out to be like a very interesting discussion, and I'm also trying to structure my thoughts around it. So in the future, if I change my opinion, don't hold this against me. To start off, I think my point of view at this moment isn't necessarily that the law should change it to 21, but I understand the perspective of the WCD when they are suggesting it, because I have seen some of the same things which they have brought up in their discussions play out in the field, and especially when it comes to matters of maternal and child health, it resonated a lot with me. So my position at this point is I see the necessity of following this angle, and I would wait for the task force to make its full and final recommendations. Of course, one of the big things that I would like to start with is not to conflate this entire issue with the issue of addressing child marriage. That is one of the big problems that I have with this discourse, the way it's playing out. This seems to be more about the transitional state of adulthood with a little bit of adolescence coming in. So when we are looking at, say, 17 to 21, it is a critical period when a woman and a young boy transition into adulthood. And this particular phase has its own set of sort of developmental challenges associated with it, which is very different from something which a 16 or a 15-year-old boy or girl would face. So what is happening right now is clearly a conflation with child marriage, which is slightly problematic. But at the same time, I understand where people are coming from, so I'll try to address both these things together. The other sort of issue that I would like to start with is whenever this topic is being brought up, this like one major point that is being spoken about is this law alone won't do anything. This law alone won't do anything. I don't think there's a need to state that. We are aware that this law alone won't do anything. So I don't think that that itself can be like an argument against any law being made. So with these two things said, let me start a little bit into why I feel it would be important. Currently, if we look at the kind of situations under which any marriage is happening in the under 18 category and also in the under 21 category, I'd focus a little bit more on under 18 now. A major chunk of these marriages, though we hear less about it, is coming from a deep seated normative value associated with early marriage. So it is coming from the community, from families, sometimes internalized and introjected by the girls themselves. And here I'll focus more on girls because honestly, I'm not very well read on early marriage issues for young men. I'm sure there'll be other people who can comment about it. So one of the things there which is happening is this norm is made up by a number of factors. One of the first things that we hear when we go to villages is that early marriage is almost to be used as a barrier to protect the chastity of the young girls. So to allow them to not, so to prevent them from going astray, the best way is to get them married off. The other way in which we hear this is she might have an affair, there might be boys chasing after her, there are Romeos all around, so better get her married off, and we know that she's secure. The other sort of health mental models which apply to this are that the earlier you conceive, you're more fertile, you can have more babies, all of that. There are other reasons like say dowry, which also play a major part. When you are a young girl, there is a value associated with your youth and your nobility and how so your age itself has an attraction value because of which you do not have to pay that much dowry. So that is also another significant reason why parents sort of do this. Apart from this, there are structural reasons like education. A lot of people don't find the kind of education that we currently have to have a lot of value. So there is no necessity to make the girls continue to be in school anymore. We can get them married. And finally, the last one, which we sort of almost anchor to, is poverty, economic drudgery. When you do not have the means to provide for your daughter, it's better for somebody else to provide for her. So this is like the normative setup under which it is acceptable, and there is sort of no whistleblowing in the community also when it comes to early marriage. It is something that is both acceptable and to a certain extent desirable, and that is why it becomes very difficult to combat it. The second kind of marriage which we hear about more often from the left, the first one that I talked about was from the non-left. This is the criticism that we hear. From the left, it is actually the opposite, where we hear about young men and women eloping, boys and girls eloping and marrying, and any kind of law which prevents that kind of marriage is actually taking away from their rights. It's very interesting that the non-left sort of wants to prevent this elopement to happen, and hence they marry off girls. And on the left side, they actually want to validate these marriages, and hence they do not want this act. So it's almost like a horseshoe theory where the non-left and left are coalescing against any kind of move to increase this age. So what happens in this elopement case is also interesting to understand. In India, particularly, there is a very strong taboo against any kind of premarital sex. But it is evolutionarily seen that the idea of sexual exploration, or at least romantic exploration, isn't something that you can completely clamp down on. So while young boys and girls, with the amount of exposure that they are having, they are more open to romantic relationships, they still have a lot of taboos around premarital sex. So when you know that the society isn't going to accept this standard of romantic love, the idea is to immediately get into a relationship which has sanction in society, and then sort of continue with your sexual relationship. So that is one issue which leads to elopement. So elopement isn't really happening because people are dying to get married at 16 and 17. The idea is that if we don't do it, we will be ostracized more, and I would rather get out and get married. The issue that is happening after this is that the largest number of cases under PCMA are coming from this elopement part, and that is why a lot of the criticism that we are currently hearing is around this. The third kind of marriage that we are seeing in this category is the forced marriage, abduction sort of thing that we are seeing in these love jihad cases that we are talking about, where somebody drags away a girl who's a minor and then sort of grooms her and gets her married off. Now, moving into why has this necessity come in to address that age needs to be increased? This is fundamentally a departure from the idea that girls under 18 are only susceptible to bad maternal and reproductive health problems. So the idea that the task force came up with, the insights that they got from the field, and increasingly that's being noted everywhere, is that this transitional period of 18 to 21 is also a major period where these health outcomes are deteriorating for girls. So when we are saying that girls are not getting married at 18, first of all, there is a lot of false reporting happening. So if girls are, say, getting married off at 16 or 17, in official records, it's being maintained as 18. But even if they are getting married at 19 or 20, even then the health problems are significant, because considering the background from which these girls are coming, which is most, like, I think 40% of such marriages are happening in the lowest income quartile. So we know that it is from deprived, economically deprived families, and within that there is the additional burden of early marriage, and I would still say early, considering we are discussing around 21. So the idea behind this is to peg the problem slightly differently and say that it isn't 18, but it is still a slightly longer period that these girls need to be. So it needs a slightly longer period to acknowledge that there is a developmental problem which we need to address. So I think that is the premise behind this, change in the age bracket that we are considering, and nothing else. The second important reason that's coming up in this space, and I think people talk about it quite often, but we've not unpacked it in much depth, is the difference in the age currently between men and women when it comes to age at marriage. So for girls, it's 18, for boys, it's 21. One of the key provisions in PCMA is that till 2 years after the marriage has been conducted. And firstly, I think all the readers should understand that currently under the PCMA Act, child marriages are not actually void. They are voidable but not void. So they are technically legal till the minor in the party goes and says that I don't want this marriage to hold. So if you are somebody who's 17 and who's getting married and who goes to the court and says, I'm okay with this marriage, you are legally still married. Your marriage is not void. So what is happening in this case is the provision says for 2 years after your marriage, so say you get married at 16, till the time you're 18, or say the boy gets married at 19, till the age that he's 21, he can go and say that this marriage isn't working for me, I'm facing these kind of problems, and you can nullify the marriage. So this is a current provision that is there. You're given a 2-year respite period. But consider, how does the age difference play out for boys and girls? So if a girl is married at 16 to a boy at 19, the boy can nullify it till he's 21, the girl can only do it till she's 18. So there is like a 5-6 year age difference between this. And on top of that, we often see that younger girls are marrying boys at least with a 3-4 year age difference. It's very, very few times that we see it's like at the common age. So those 5-6 years are extremely critical to have that experience, to have that that acknowledgement of what problems you're facing and reaching out to somebody. So your feelings, your power dynamics are getting very critically skewed when you have that 5-6 year age difference between boys and girls. So that's a critical reason to have the age at marriage same for both boys and girls. Now the law commission suggested that it should actually be brought down to 18. But I would say, and I think like this is my logic, maybe the task force has something else to say about it. In India, particularly, and I think globally, we see one of the strongest norms that apply in marriage is the idea of hypergamy. So, hypergamy is basically, in terms of evolutionary psychology, you aspire to marry somebody who has a higher status than you. So, in India, it could be caste, it could be class. So earlier there was Anuloma, Pratiloma marriages. Even now, there's a very interesting article in Intellect which talked about how 78% of girls aspire for the top 20% of men. So that is the idea of hypergamy, and it is a very very dominant norm because it's very biologically significant and it's happening everywhere. So stripped bare of everything else, I think one of the critical things here is that forget caste, forget asset ownership, forget any other thing. Age is the one marker that establishes somebody higher than you. And that is why it is a very dominant norm that girls will marry or try to marry somebody who's slightly older than them. So what will happen if boys come, like if the age at marriage for boys is brought down to 18, qualified for this guy would definitely be somebody who's 15, 16. That is good work because that is how our society is, and even girls think that way. If there is no age difference, it will be very difficult to manage that. So this is going to be one critical reason that plays out when you reduce that age, and a lot of activists have spoken about this. That is why I feel a better way of balancing this out would be taking the age to 21 for everybody and then seeing how it plays out from there. Now, I think more than the law and forget the law, more than the idea behind reducing maternal mortality by delaying marriage and hence delaying pregnancy, there are a lot of criticisms to why this is happening. One of the criticisms is around the implementation of PCMA itself. So some say that based on NFHS figures, PCMA has already worked. So why do you want another law? While others say that, it's not working. So if it's not working, why do you want another law? Some are saying, why have a law? Why not do like other things? Why not improve education? Why not like get economic upliftment, which is allowing women to get into the work stream? Why not sort of change norms? Why not sensitize all of that? So there are a couple of answers to this. First of all, I don't think having a law in place means that other things do not happen simultaneously. It has been happening, it will continue to happen. We are like economic upliftment certainly has helped, at least in urban areas, to increase the age at marriage. But at the same time, we need to acknowledge that a critical role of PCMA has been to increase the lower level of marriage. So the lower age bar of marriage. Currently, if you look at NFHS data, only 6% of girls are married before the age of 15. And those 6% will be highly concentrated in the states of Rajasthan and West Bengal. West Bengal, I'm sure you understand, because certain communities are out of the purview of this. So that is again another criticism of the act. But in to a large extent, under 15 marriages have been brought down significantly. So if you are setting the age at 18, what people are managing to do at 16 or 17, they can still pass off someone as 18. At 13 and 14, they are unable to do. So the lower age has certainly increased. So something that could happen at this point would be, if you increase the age to 21, probably the lower age will continue rising further and come up to the age of 18, which we are currently struggling with. So that could be one aspect. And at the same time, change the law and all the provisions currently applicable for under 16, under 18 marriages are brought into the under 21 category, where marriages are not considered void, but special cases are included there, like say taking the consent of the girl in the marriage. If she is interested in marrying the boy, then she can take the consent. At the same time, you create a norm that it is not okay, and you increase as many barriers to it as possible. So this was something where I have changed my opinion slightly, basically looking at numbers, because when I looked at the numbers, currently there are 48% of girls who are married under the age of 20. So imagine how much resources would go into changing the perspective of 50% of the population who are marrying under that age. So just from the point of practicality, I feel that it is going to be very difficult to ensure a blanket ban for marriages under the age of 21. It's not going to work out because legally this person is an adult. But what you could do is take some of the provisions of PCMA currently and apply it to the under 21, 18 to 21 category, marking it as a specific transition phase to adulthood. And under 18, you declare all marriages as void. Right from the beginning, don't give them legal sanction. This is something that's happened in the state of Karnataka, where they are currently not holding any marriage under the age of 18 legal. So that could be something we proceed towards, and this flexibility can be brought in at any age, so that once parents themselves become aware that the barriers have increased, there is a reason for increasing it up to 21, because there is a very significant developmental challenge for girls in this age. Their education is suffering because once you transition from your natal home to your marital home, again, a lot of people brought in the criticism that dropouts don't really happen because girls are married, and they are right. Dropouts don't happen because of that. They are promised that when they go to their marital home, they'll continue with their education. But once you transition and you start feeling that they just drop out because of that flux period. So some things like this are happening. Mobility barriers increase when a girl is marrying in at that age. So I strongly feel there is a reason behind why the government feels that they have increased, there is sense to increasing the age to 21. There are a lot more minor, not minor, but there are a lot of criticisms that I'd like to address, but I'll stop here and maybe we can continue during the discussion.
All right, so Padma, I wanted to come to you over here. Obviously, Pratyasha has laid her thoughts down very well. Now, before I come to you, I just wanted to make a passing remark, and I wanted you to incorporate these two. As of what I have understood right now, I don't forget the source of the data, but I remember the mean female marriage age is in India is about 21 years, and 35% or something married before that age, as per one particular source. I'll check in the meantime. I'll actually literally Google so that I remember the source too when I was doing my research. But so if we incorporate that reality into it, so what are your thoughts on this whole subject in general, and where do you stand, so that first we can hear where you stand, and then maybe you and I and Pratyasha can take up the next step, which will be very specific questions that I had in mind. So go for it, Padma.
Yeah, thanks, Kushal. Unlike Pratyasha, I don't have any data. The sociological studies or the reasoning behind why infant mortality or maternal mortality or malnutrition. Actually, this was declared first by the Prime Minister in his 2014 Independence Day speech, that he had mentioned that there are plans to increase the marital age of women for these particular reasons. The discussion, the speech, the part of the speech was about women's health and empowerment, and specifically had mentioned malnutrition and infant mortality. So I have absolutely no clue about the studies that clearly say how these correlate in these additional three years. And have hearing Pratyasha put out the percentages and the facts and figures, I would say that if that is the case, definitely there needs to be steps taken. But from a legal angle, because I'm sociologically, I believe that there are two Indias: the urban India that I live in currently, and there is a rural India which behaves entirely differently from the way we people who live in urban or semi-urban Indias. So, it is never an equal application of the law between these two spaces. Urban India accepts the kind of dialogues and changes and things like that, and even the people who have moved, migrants from rural places, start adapting to these laws quickly because there is access to police systems or justice, or there are groups or NGOs working with them. There is more access to everything, whereas the rural India behaves in a different way. So I'm not sure, my personal thoughts, like I discussed before the opening of this between us. If I had a daughter and if she were 18 and if she wanted to get married, I would not allow her to get married till she found a job. That is a basic criteria in my mind, because age of maturity in my mind probably is good enough for the country to vote, to drive, to enter into legal contracts, to purchase stuff. But in my mind, unless you are economically independent, you are not good for marriage. So this is my opinion about women and men both. But this is again from an urban landscape where I know that I will give an opportunity to both my son as well as my daughter to have equal education, to have higher pursuits. I will foot their bills for how many ever years that they need to study. All those things happen in our perspective, and that is the reason why I would be able to make that clear distinction, that I would say no, it's not possible, it is not desirable, and I would not advise it. So, but when it comes to a rural situation, whereas I live in Hyderabad now, and the people around me, there are a lot of migrants who come to work here, and many of them have grandchildren. Many of them who are my age have grandchildren, and the logic, the reasoning why that happens, and it has been very difficult to me to imagine what would have been their conditions in that abject poverty, to be married off to an alien home, to be contributors again, to be working in the fields, to contribute economically, and then to have the burden of childbirth and everything. But the logic and reasoning of rural folk when it comes to marriage, and especially about girls, is an entirely different dimension, is what I have understood. There are a lot of considerations. Pratyasha spoke about, elopement, the social stigma attached to, women falling in love, or, having relationship with boys. There are safety issues that most of them do not have pakka houses, or if the woman is working alone in the field, there are chances of getting attacked. But if there is a tag of a husband, that is, this is a married lady, that sort of gives them a feeling of sense of security. All those social aspects, it's a different world out there, and probably those reasonings will have to be looked at while formulating. See, we have not seen the report of the commission. I think Jaya Jetli ma'am heads the committee that has been appointed in 2014. The report has not come out. What their recommendations are, what other provisions of the law they are recommending, we have no clue. We are just discussing our thoughts. But in my mind, the more number of women who are getting married off earlier happens in the rural places of India, and because there are multiple factors which still the Indian law has not been able to implement in those places. There are laws, like if somebody has abducted your daughter, you're supposed to get justice, but it doesn't happen. The daughter ends up getting married somewhere, and then you see her after a few months, and then she's pregnant or whatever. So the practical reality, whether the commission is studying those issues, whether they are accommodating, because unless those issues are accommodated, no law is going to help get this delivered, because things are happening even today. Like Pratyasha said, there are many marriages which are happening in the minor age itself, which are then regularized by the girl's consent or the minor's consent. I mean, the minor doesn't have the ability to give consent in a sexual relationship, and then you're asking them whether they want to be continued to be married. I mean, I feel that it's a travesty. There are such issues which, unless thoroughly accommodated, the law itself is not going to do anything, in my opinion. The second part is the legal issue, because I've been reading about it. I feel that whenever we have laws, the way those laws are interpreted in courts is what really drives stuff on the ground. So how do courts handle these issues, and the personal freedoms and people's relationships and things like that? And for that reason, I have read up on a few judgments and cases and things like that. But what came to my this thing is live-in relationships, what is broadly called as civil unions, are legal today. The Supreme Court has very categorically said that anybody who has crossed the age of maturity can opt to have a live-in, can opt to live with anybody they choose to have, can opt to have sexual relationships, can opt to have any of those things, and they can get pregnant, they can have children, any of those things after the age of maturity. So how does having a law of marriage prevent, the renaming of these marriages which are happening as just live-in, where when you say that a minor child is giving consent to continue to be married to somebody, and then those marriages are legalized, do you think that the parents or families or whoever will not get these children to say that no, it is my choice, I'm living in with him or her or whatever? Live-in relationships have been made legal by the courts. So where is the question? So what is currently going to happen is, if you raise the marriage age from 18 to 21 for girls, those 3 years would be then categorized as live-in. So she would be living in a partnership where it is not legal, but she would be still fulfilling all the responsibilities of a wife. And this, to me, was the biggest red flag. And I do not understand how that will be that will be accommodated by the commission, this particular aspect. You cannot prevent a major, somebody who has attained the age of majority, legal emancipation, you cannot prevent them from getting into any relationship. So the assumption when that judgment was made is that these relationships are between urban adults. So this is a consenting setup, they have taken it out of choice. But what is preventing the society, that currently all these problems are happening, what is preventing the society from doing that to women and then making them vulnerable for 3 more years? They do not have a legal marriage. That the person who's gotten married can suddenly get up and say, okay, that's it, bye. And there are no rights other than the social taboos or the relationship between parents, or maybe the religious marriage that has happened, or stuff like that. So where is the protection for the women, where you are going to now get them into a 3-year setup where they have no legal rights, where they are still going to be called as an unwed daughter? And this is another thing that really baffles me in the law, is this guardianship act that we have. Again, we try to say that men and women are equal. There are lots of equality slogans that we raise, but in the law, women are still treated as a different entity that at times need to be protected, and in certain laws we hold the burden of all sort of social responsibilities. So law is very very weird to me, because I'm probably not a lawyer and I'm not able to understand the logic behind it. But what, I lost my thread. So the legal age of marriage again, in maturing, the 18 as the age of maturity emancipates the woman from everything. That is, you can enter into a contract, you can start a company, you can start a job, any of those things, except the fact that the parent has to continue till she is married to provide all the basic necessities to that woman without expecting any compensation or contribution into the family. The unwed daughter is supposed to be still under some form of a guardianship of the father. And even if the unwed daughter is 50 years old, she's still supposed to be under the guardianship of the father. So this girl who's crossed 18, living in with a boy, maybe with social approval, is still considered to be under the guardianship of the father, where he has to provide for sustenance. So imagine that the child gets pregnant. The entire onus of treatment and the payment of everything and if the girl is abandoned while she is pregnant, the child obviously is considered to be a legal heir of the father and everything. But what rights do the women have? Then they are returned with a child to the father's family, and still the father and the parental home will take the whole responsibility of maintenance, which is even true in any other case. Even if you're married, if you come back, the law states that the woman has to be taken care of by the parental home if they are abandoned. But the rights of a live-in relationship as defined, and this is again very funny, in none of the judgments it is mentioned how many years is considered a good enough number of years to be considered as a valid live-in relationship. The judgments all say that If it is a long-term live-in relationship, it is considered like a marriage, a quasi-marriage or whatever. Yes, it's very strange. Don't squint your face. It is, the judgments read like this. They say long-term, sufficiently long-term. It's not defined. Number of years or number of months or number of whatever is not defined. It is entirely arbitrarily case to case. So then now we are leaving these girls in the hands of courts for justice. If there are issues with this live-in relationship in this 3 years, these girls will then go to courts and try to wait for justice, which will come probably after 20 years. And then the social taboo of everything, being unmarried or whatever it is. So this is one thing where I find that if you're going to have an evolved society and then say that, age of maturity equals everything, then you should accept that as legal adults, both men and women should be able to do what they like after that age of maturity. So now this protectionism which steps in, the state wants to do certain protectionism to women, is actually not helping because of this, because there are thousands of loopholes which have added on through the years and have made the situation a mess. The highest cases of child marriage currently, which are reported and people arrested, are in the tribal areas. Like in Kerala, if you see the main other areas, you will not find much of child marriages reported, but the instances of reporting is very high in tribal areas. So there are a lot of those articles which came out and we read about it and all that. The tribals don't even know that the law is this. They are just following the systems that have been happening from many years. And when a health worker or an NGO goes to a place, a tribal society, they find that this has happened. And then they suddenly arrest the men and put them in jail. Then, the whole family becomes orphaned suddenly because the man is in jail. They are still married and with children. They have no clue. So the reach of laws and the government, the state, into the rural areas, especially to the remote corners, is still, I would not want to call it pathetic, but it's still, it's not much. So when, there are pockets where the current laws itself, like the RTE, for example, 10 years of compulsory education, how many women in rural areas are getting these 10 years, the 15 years of compulsory education? How many women are getting these access to this RTE provision? If you are getting a girl to get stay at home, to not marry till 21, in the duration, she has to be a contributing member of the society. Now, for that, what would you want to do? You would say that you should insist that she should be educated. You should insist that she should learn trade or whatever it is. You cannot have an uneducated girl not contributing to the family's income and sitting idle and in the family and basically looked upon as a parasite. I really hate using that word, but that in the rural scenario, I've heard that these are the kind of words that are being used for women who are not married and unable to contribute, because hard labor is the only option that they have and it's not safe to send them out into the fields. So they end up sitting at home, and then the whole family and the society looks at them as somebody who's just mooching off the family. So then the government will have to step in and say that compulsory education and free education will be provided to women till the age of 21. So then, that there is a question that shouldn't men also have access to that? There are a lot of those kind of open ends which have not been addressed, and we should hope that the commission addresses these issues. But till they are not, I feel that this will not get a buy-in from everybody. From whoever I have discussed in my circles itself, they say that it is a faulty law, and if it is implemented, it will end up causing harassment of a particular community, of some particular kind of people, so they all feel that it is going to be an uneven application of a very faulty kind of a law. So that's my point. But personally, I would love it for all women to be educated till they complete their degrees at least, because I feel that this education till 10th standard is inadequate, and as a country which is trying to develop its nation, education is something that they have to make accessible. And if that is done, so then having avenues for creative employment for development is something that is a must. So unless it's all tied in and this live-in rule is clarified, I would say no thanks for the current version of the law.
Yeah, so now that I've heard both of you guys, there are so many things that needs to be unpacked, but this is where I'm kind of stuck at a personal level. So, okay, I'll come to you first, Pratyasha, and then we'll go to Padma, and then we can go back and forth as always. But to me, I think the problem is that uh, there is a culture in India. When I say in India, and I'm talking about from the behavioral perspective of the Indian state and the Indian babudam. What we seem to do in India at times is that we obviously, like every society, we have problems, and whether we like it or not, in a good way, this is the positive. We are good at identifying problems, at least. So you'll see scenarios where the Indian state identifies problems. Sometimes it is done through the way of NGOs going and approaching the state and telling the state these are problems. Sometimes the society itself, by itself recognizes a problem. Okay, this is kind of off, and they go and kind of lobby the state that we need to solve problems. But there seems to be a culture in India where our go-to solution. Now, I'll be very honest. I'm very agnostic on this particular case of what should be the legal age of marriage. Personally, I'm very agnostic to this question. There are multiple things that are conflicting in my head, but we are the kind of society where we believe for every problem there has to be a law. It doesn't matter whether the law works or not, and the trend is always going towards where there are two Indias. I think Padma put it very perfectly, where there is this urban reality that we are all part of. I like to call it the degrees of anglicization are different, but we are semi anglicized Indian urban folks. And then there is the non anglicized India, which lives in a completely different reality. This is not meant to be presented in that we are superior, they are inferior. Let me be very categorical here. I'm just drawing two broad boundaries here. And the laws seem to be created identifying problems in rural areas and applied to urban realities. And sometimes the laws are not really needed for urban realities. At least the data doesn't bear it out, in my view. In this subject, I don't see it's happening. Oh, and just for the record, that mean age claim was from the SBI, apparently, which through its data and research has made the claim that in India, according to the SBI, and let me read it properly, that women, 35 so the average age of marriage in India is already above 21 years, and about 35% of are married before the age of 21. That was SBI, so I'd completely blanked out as to who had made that claim. So the State Bank of India has made that claim. So now here's the question. Now again, so I'm going to take both of your points, and I'll come to you first, Pratyasha. So Padma made a very interesting point, as in, so you have certain activities where the age of 18 seems fine. You can drive a car, you can vote. I believe in terms of cognitive ability and cognitive decision making, I think, voting is also as tough a decision. Uh, Ask us, as a BJP voter, I can say, suffering in Maharashtra right now. So, besides the point, but the point is, if you can make a voting decision, which also kind of involves cognitive abilities of sifting through data, sifting through policies, understanding, making life decisions, because what you vote for eventually has a humongous implication on your life. So Pratyasha, that is there on one side, and on the other side are genuine problems which you mentioned, which involve the biology of a woman, the psychology of a woman, the life of a woman. Now my question, Pratyasha, as a follow-up would be, in this case, then are we identifying a social problem and giving it a legal solution, where maybe whether we like it or not, and no matter how slow or fast it is, the solution lies in the social realm and not in the legal realm? Okay, I don't know why I'm not able to unmute Pratyasha. Just give me a second. Yeah, you're unmuted now.
Okay. To the point of voting, because this point keeps coming up every time when we have a discussion around age, I strongly believe Yeah. Can you hear me? Can you hear me, Kushal?
Yeah, I can.
Hello.
You're audible to us, Pratyasha.
Hello.
You're audible to us, Pratyasha. I think there's something off with Pratyasha's internet. Let me see. Let me wait for her to come back online. Uh, until we figure out Pratyasha's internet, Padma, so I'll come to you. So I'll let Pratyasha answer the question later on. So I had a question for you too after the remarks. So let me come to you then. Now, defining what is to be regulated through the law and what is not to be regulated through the law is a tricky one too. Now, the problem with state interference is that if I allow state interference in X case, why can't I allow Okay, Pratyasha, you're back. So let me see. Can you hear me now?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, I can hear you. I was able to hear you then too.
I I can hear you, but am I audible?
Yeah, yeah, you're audible.
Hello.
You're audible to me, Pratyasha.
Hello. Okay. Is it okay? One point on the aged voting thing because it keeps it's at when we look at like age of majority at for different occasions, there's no necessity that it should actually be same and it should be uniform for every single activity. So I find that understanding itself to be slightly faulty. Comes to voting, people feel, I think you did that, it's burden.
Okay, Pratyasha is off again. Unfortunately, so somebody just made a joke on the live chat that Pratyasha and Nikhil,
People
there are
based
two
on
people.
how far, how many factors they take into consideration while doing it. But for an average person, the decision is absolutely clear. It's where you get most benefits from. Whether it is sort of a tribalistic, communitarian identity that you want to go with, or it is something where there are material benefits accruing from, some party being in power, you immediately cast your vote there. So I don't feel that this thing which comes up like once in 3 years or once in 5 years, and you vote for somebody and you let it go for the next 5 years. Like even now, I talk so much of politics, but I mean, what real life sort of problems am I having if my vote goes one way or the other? Like my life goes on. I think similarly for a lot of people, their lives go on. But with marriage, I don't think that's the same thing. Marriage is something where you have to negotiate and bargain, and you have to keep, like you are on a constant acceptance seeking journey throughout marriage. There are different kinds of people you have to manage. If it is a joint family, there are different kinds of negotiations that you have to make. Within the family setup, also, it's not always the best situation, the most amicable situation for all kinds of people. Some have more domestic violence to deal with, there is forced sex to deal with, there is economic drudgery, there is sometimes mobility restrictions. So I don't think it's an easy business. It's probably the most difficult relationship that a man and a woman, like, or two individuals can be in, because it takes constant work to keep at it and maintain it and keep it at a healthy level. So I feel it's the most difficult task in terms of both cognitive, emotional, psychological burden, and that is because it has the most returns also. So you will get way more returns from a marriage than any political party will be able to give you, because that is basically you're fulfilling like your responsibility, you're taking a family forward, all of that. So I think it's probably the most important decision that two people have to make, their families have to make. Let's not conflate it with voting. It might sound like we are doing some highfalutin task by going and voting, but the biggest task we are doing is managing a house, managing our kids, managing elders, like keeping that dynamic safe, keeping that institution going and keeping it healthy is a huge task. And I think we should give adequate acknowledgement to how momentous it is. So that's the first thing. The second like sort of thing that you talked about was whether it is necessary to have laws when solutions are always social. Of course, in this domain, it's understandable that solutions are social. So it is social when there was a law passed for triple talaq. It is social when there are laws passed against conversion. It is social when there are laws passed against casteism in India, or against eve teasing, or against any other thing. So there are no clear cut legal solutions to any social evils, because it is like unless you change a norm or you break through it, you can't have a solution. So the idea behind, and we certainly know that laws or the legal route is not enough to break norms. Legal routes are to chip away at norms. So it has to be there for a long term period to establish what this society considers as a higher ideal. So I, for a fact, now know that conversion laws are not really working. But a conversion law is still needed to establish the intent of the state and to establish a collective morality of the people who it represents. Similarly, I think a lot of the laws that we have around caste, around gender, around any other thing, we know that it's probably not going to work in the short period. So we know that we have 40 years of a law where 18 is the legal age at marriage, but it's probably not 100% efficient if we still have 28% women, and these are official numbers, marrying under the age of 18. But without the law, do we know that not having the law would make the situation any better? I really don't know that. So I understand the reluctance that we have with passing laws. I also face that, and I might be slightly hypocritical in saying this because I change my opinion from context to context based on whether laws are necessary or not. But I feel laws represent the commitment of the state, they represent the commitment of the party which is in power, they reflect the collective morality of a people, and sometimes laws come first and the society has to catch up to it. It has happened in India quite a few times. So when we had laws against untouchability, or we had laws against like SC/ST atrocities, or even gender violence based laws, it isn't that the society has come together to say that this churn is imminent. The law came first, and then we are seeing, of course, some sections of the society reflected that, but the law came first, and it had to sort of pull the society up to that level. Now, this is a very problematic understanding, and I totally get it, how it will change based on which party is in power. But that is why, the politics part, the worldview part of who makes our laws is so important. I totally agree with you, and I agree with Padma ji also when she said that I don't see this law solving all these issues 100%. I don't see age at marriage alone being increased to 21, changing or stopping sort of marriages under 18, improving maternal mortality, or sort of eliminating maternal mortality completely. But I see it as setting a benchmark for what the society aspires, so that over the course of time, all the other changes that happen along with it work towards this benchmark. So that is how I would place any law in this context. And I'm again saying law if and when the task commission the setup, the committee that they have set up finds it necessary to go the legal route. So right now, these are just my points based on whatever new findings they have, because they will of course be making like primary consultations with stakeholders who have much deeper skin in the game. So let's see what they recommend. But I don't think the criticism around not taking a legal route, especially when nothing exists in that space, we don't have too much existing in that 18 to 21 bracket. Like, say, for instance, you had the discussion around the love jihad case, and Nikhil talked about how there are already like recourses available, so you don't need to go there. I would have also said that had there been a provision to address this additional problem of this new age category. If there isn't, and this is being considered to be critical enough for the state to interfere, because remember, increasing maternal mortality, infant mortality, malnutrition, women getting out of the workforce, women dropping out of schools, is all going to be a burden on the state eventually. So when the state is going to take charge of filling in these gaps, the state has some right to enter into these decisions and make them for us. And it's not the first time that this is happening. So yeah, I hope I've to some extent answered your question.
All right, Padma. So here's my question for you. Now, here's the thing about laws, and obviously there is no one universal answer when it comes to formulating laws or criticizing laws or not criticizing laws. To be very honest, I think Pratyasha was very correct that we are all going to be hypocritical sometime or the other, where we'll say we need a law in this case, but we don't want a law in the other case, and we're all going to go through that reality in our life. I mean, my answer to that has always been that laws are needed where there is a clear-cut violation of the harm principle. I always look
Yeah.
at things from the realm of philosophy, and in philosophy there is the concept of the harm principle, and the harm principle being that you're allowed to have alcohol individually, but that's your individual, but you cannot have alcohol, sit in a car and drive drunken, because you violate the harm principle where you're endangering the life of others. Now in the case of marriage, you clearly, in my opinion, there is no clear cut case in my opinion of the harm principle as such, because so my worry in this case, and I don't know, so I wanted to know your views, is that you narrated the story where these cases are found out in tribal communities, and then they end up arresting the whole damn family, and it creates cascading effects. Now in everything in life, policies are made, and I think this is kind of a problem in India and in the world in general when it comes to policy making is always looked at it from the prism of first order effects. They don't look at second order, third order effects. And what I mean, COVID has been the classic example of that. Lockdown, what after that, it was just one policy. Now in the case of setting the legal age for marriage, obviously this is an assumption that the state is looking at putting the legal marriage at 21. My concern is that when you tell the state you can decide the legal age of marriage, and your angle on the live-in relationship is very interesting, because now, didn't the state say that live-in relationships, if carried on for a longer period, would be just considered like a marriage also in the long run for women and their rights? So I don't understand. And two, this is going to sound very annoying to a lot of people, and before people say baba maine bhi shadi ki hui hai or register ki hui hai, so don't get excited. But the point is, I mean, hypothetically, at the end of the day, what is the difference between a live-in relationship and a marriage other than the piece of paper that you have signed? In my
Exactly.
opinion, I mean, there is nothing. So how do we get out of this conundrum? And then if you give the signal to the state that you can interfere here, then why is the state not going to take this as an opportunity and legislate every other portion of your life? So how do we deal with that, Padma?
Absolutely. I'm not a proponent of a state entering into anybody's homes. I think unless and until there is a complaint that, like you said, the harm principle, and that's where I disagree probably with Pratyasha, is that in the cases of domestic violence or in case of untouchability or the caste-based discrimination or something, there is always an injured party. But in the case of marriage, the state is assuming that the woman who's getting married at 18 is an injured party. The assumption is on the part of the state. The woman who's getting married at 18 has not raised a complaint. Now, there could be various reasons of why she has not raised a complaint. It could be due to her ignorance. It could be due to social taboo. It could be 100 things. But there are also cases where they are genuinely invested in the marriage. They want to get married because, their life, the natural trajectory of their life is that. And like I said, again, women who are not educated, who are not able to be educated, who are not able to continue their education, after some point, there is a stage in their life where, both men and women think, now what? And for especially in rural areas, the women are subjected to this question a lot in their own minds, and for them the logical progression is marriage, so they are not an injured party. So when you have those laws, when we compare to those laws where there is an injured party of domestic violence, of untouchability, of caste-based discrimination, any of those social taboos, there was always an injured party with a complaint. But here, without even a complaint or a question raised by a woman, the state is now stepping in and interfering and saying that, look, I'm going to arbitrate on your behalf because I know your welfare better than you. And this is problematic to me. But again, there are issues where women are forced into things. They are not educated enough to, cry out or seek help. So there are a percentage of women who are being forced into it, who are sufferers. Probably, I think the delivery of existing systems like, the Domestic Violence Act and the Domestic Violence Act, live-in relationships, like we mentioned, in that, irrespective of the number of long-term years that you have undefinedly left open in the whole universe, irrespective of that, whatever duration, the Domestic Violence Act applies. That's very strange to me again. You don't count it as a marriage unless, some judge thinks it's long-term enough. But you will count it for domestic violence and domestic abuse because it's a domestic live-in relationship. And the judgment has weird wording. So in that, it says that you should have presented yourself as a couple to the society. I mean, you are going to now, the court is going to ask the watchman and the milkwala and everybody that did they present themselves as a couple? To what extent are the courts going to come in and arbitrate? So this is a question where the government is stepping in, where there could be no injured parties, where they are going to now compulsorily have the force of justice thrust on them, and interfering into affairs already. And this is my personal opinion again. I have felt, as an empowered woman, many of the laws paint women as weak, as people who need extra help, as people who are lesser than men, especially the minimum wage act and all those things. Clearly, the state themselves now put forward an argument saying that women are paid less than men. Women are supposed to work less hours than men, or whatever it is. Beneficial, definitely, but the wages are less. So the state itself perpetuates this myth, and there is some UN commission which has written about this Marriageable Age Act, where they said that the age difference between men and women in marriageable age is problematic because it creates an impression on both sides. One, that women mature easily and earlier than men, and that are able to take more social responsibilities or familial responsibilities earlier than men, and that taboo perpetuates certain norms. So the age should be the same for men and women and things like that, which I agree again. But the fact is, in my opinion, then lower the men's marriage age to 18. You on one hand, you keep perpetuating these social norms and myths that have created this problem, and then on the other hand, you want to do these quick fixes. This is the problem. I don't have a problem with laws. I have a problem if those laws are not practicably implementable, like you say, like the trickle down effects of those laws, the domino effect, what it serves is a problem to me. And if a woman, like I said, is giving consent and entering into a relationship, that woman is not an injured party. And I do not like the state to step in and then say that I'm going to do justice for you, which is really crossing her personal boundaries. It has to be done. The draft of the law, is something that we have not seen. So I think I would hope that the government and the commissions are addressing all these issues. I would like to be optimistic about it, but you know me, I have not been a fan of how these have been implemented over these years. Yeah.
Yeah. Kushal, could I come in here?
Sure.
Yeah. I I think it's a very interesting point about who is an injured party and who isn't. I think the issue here would be that just the way with minors, you don't have to wait for a minor to come and say that, there is a potential for damage and hence, treat me as an injured party, because you understand that there is an imminent danger that this person may or may not face, and hence this is something where the state needs to come in. I would actually address this particular issue similarly, where the danger is highly imminent, which is substantiated by the amount of data that we have, particularly in the realm of health, also in the realm of violence that happens in such marriages. There are a number of studies which have pointed out to that. Of course, the task force will be able to substantiate whether it is like, because the state has the right to interfere when there are questions of morality or of health or of security. We know that there are some of these caveats which are there. So if there is a significant enough health issue associated with this, then the state definitely has a right to come in and say, look, these are the problems that are there. Do you consent? Do you still consent to get into this relationship? And that is why I said, in this law, if ever it happens, I at this point don't see it as being like a blanket law where everything is declared void. So I don't see marriages between the age of 18 to 21 declared void. It is more about how it is done now, where under 16, if you are giving consent that I am agreeing to enter into this relationship with full awareness of the problems that it might bring, if the same thing is done to girls and boys above the age of 18 and 21, sorry, above the age of 21, then we can proceed with the relationship. So that is one part of it. The second part, I think, Padmaji, when she talked about live-in relationships, to me, it sort of boils down to the issue of age of consent, age at consent, and age at marriage. For the left, particularly, and Oxfam and all the organizations who are now campaigning against this particular move by the government, which is very interesting. The idea for them is basically to reduce the age of consent even further, take it down to 16, and then instead of thinking of 21, make the age of marriage at 18. So take it down even further. Again, like I said, they have. Are you saying something, Kushal? No. Okay. Yeah. So the idea behind this, again, my feeling is that since the PCMA has seen the most number of cases being filed in that elopement category by parents and relatives and other family members of girls and boys who elope before the age of 18, there is a tendency of these human rights organizations just to anchor to those kind of cases. So 700, 800 cases which have been filed for like across India for 1 year, I think 50 to 60% or maybe even more would be these kind of elopement cases. So to them, it seems like that is the only reason why this law is being used and nothing else is happening. But the normative part of it, the reason why a lot of parents pressurize their daughters, and even if that pressure does not come forward significantly, because girls themselves are aware that they might be facing a problem or it's desirable in the community to marry at that age, a significant chunk of these marriages also happen because of those reasons and not particularly due to elopement. So I'm not particularly convinced that if the marriage age is increased, most girls would get into a live-in relationship sort of scenario. What would probably happen is that if there's enough activism or if there is enough outreach from the other side to destigmatize romantic relationships or allow girls to sort of reduce that taboo around dating at a particular age or talking to boys, or even like simple things as studying in co-ed schools, because even in rural areas that is considered to be a stigma. If that is done, then the fear of being criminally persecuted, and that is why entering into a relationship might get addressed. So I get Padmaji's point that if this is allowed, why isn't that allowed? But live-in relationships and a marriage sanctified by law and socially accepted do not actually put the same kind of pressure on the woman. So once you're into that marriage thing, the next sort of goal for you, for a lot of families, is to get into procreation. That is why the first child happens almost like within a 1 to 2 year time frame, and by that time the girl is just about 18. When you are in a live-in relationship or you're in a consensual sexual or romantic relationship, you have you do not have that burden of immediately procreating. So if the state actually expands reproductive health services at that point, you can address a lot of these issues in that space. But in a marital space, you can't regulate that. You cannot go in and say that now I will tell you when you will get pregnant, because she's married and the family and the husband and the wife, they together decide when they are going to have a baby. So I think that critical difference between a marital unit and a live-in unit or a consensual romantic couple needs to be made. There is slightly more pressure in the institution of marriage than there is outside. You're saying something.
I'd like to come in there. What I defined as a live-in relationship here in this context is not the consensual romantic live-in relationship that generally people get into nowadays in urban landscape. It is it will be only called as a live-in relationship, but actually the parents of both families would be setting up the marriage. There will be a small religious ceremony, and they would be sent to live in together. With the religious ceremony, for all practical purposes in most rural landscapes, society considers these kids as married. It will be only the legal part that will be pending anymore. So that is where I have a problem. It's not about the voluntary live-in relationships which have been thought out and fleshed out and things like that. And Kushal, you had made a point that there is actually no difference between a live-in relationship and a marriage. There is. The out clause is far easier in a live-in relationship. The out clause is very, very easy, and that is why live-in relationships being legalized is worrisome in this context. So the legally the girl's family or the boys whoever family cannot go approach the police if the person says, okay, I'm done in this gap of 3 years. So that is where the problem comes.
Yeah, but here's my problem in this entire issue, and my worry stems from completely different things. I'm actually, I still can't get over the fact that in India, on an issue, the far right and the far left actually agree on something, and in this scenario, it's such a weird scenario where both are agreeing on something for completely different reasons. Now, here's my second proposition in this, and you can say it is completely wrong and I have misunderstood the entire subject, but from what I've understood, that this law is not applicable to all religions and all communities equally in India. So again, it is going to be secular takte in India will be out of the force, and communal takte in India will be under the purview of this law. So then, Pratyasha, I think if we want the overall benefit, because whether we like it or not, the disproportionate amount of underage marriages, we all know where they happen in this country, whether we like it or not, everybody knows that reality. So if we wanted to really solve a problem and bring the overall marriage age of girls in India up, don't you think
Did I lose Kushal? What's happening?
oops, yep, yes, I'm sorry. So my
I panicked when I couldn't see either of you. I'm like, what am I doing in this alone?
Was that me or was that Kushal?
No,
I
I
think
think
he's
that's
frozen.
he's still having a problem.
Okay. So Padmaji, till he joins, do you want to talk about the secular aspect of the law?
The secular aspect, I'm getting messages from my friends saying that, I should address, I'm supposed to be a part of the religious brigade, the alt right. So I should probably address the fact that the alt right wants the age to be lowered. There are people on Twitter saying that, the moment a girl menstruates, she should just then get
Yeah.
married. So I'm sorry, I'm not an alt right conservative on this. The rules, I hear people quoting Shastras, and it was allowed in all those Shastras and Smritis and all that. But unfortunately or fortunately, we do not live in the age of those Shastras. We live in a society which is not ruled by a Kshatriya king. And trying to emulate whatever happened in that era into this era, where there women are being given rights. The government itself is stepping in to compensate for a lot of things which were not happening. See, the golden era that we call of, somewhere maybe due to colonialization or I don't know what, has doled out a lot of injustice to women, and which is why again the state has stepped in. And our elders all these years, I think I consider my parents to be also trads. They have signed in by their consent and by their vote and by their franchise. When all these reforms were happening, they have not uprisen against the government and said, no, no, I want to have my Shastras back. So the fact is that with the changing scenario, we have, accepted that there are things happening for the better. We are a post-colonial society where things are completely different. And, earlier in those times, probably a king would be having his darbar open for anybody to walk in with a complaint. But today it is a Supreme Court or a district court. There are lots of steps for a person to complete to reach justice, and it is delayed by many years. So probably the state has to play a role in preventing certain things from happening rather than asking people to seek justice when crimes have happened. So no, I would not accept that argument. I would say that yes, we live by Shastras. We are trying to keep up the dharma as much as we can. But in these situations, we have allowed so much of water has flown under the bridge, and I do not agree to that argument. And personally, because I personally am somebody who will not advocate something that I do not practice. I was allowed to continue my education. The moment my fertility stepped in, I was not told that you are now preparing to be a mother. Though all the rituals, all the conversations, all the traditions were followed. We lived in that tradition itself, but we were told that, look, this is a new world and we have to exist as dharmics in this world. We are not living in an island or a bubble. So when I have not got married at 15, 18 or 20, where I have, used the opportunities that my family gave. It is not right on my part to ever say that, it should be ideal that women who are maturing should just step into marriage because their wombs are ready. Marriage
Right.
or procreation is not just about the womb being ready, in my opinion. And today, especially, you are not sending a girl to, within your village or within the neighboring village where you have a direct, supervision of their lives or things like that all through till she dies. You're sending them off to a world which is highly evolved and highly different from what you've been used to. So it's not fair. The psychological, development, their entire gamut of their entire scope of development has to be considered, and just looking at the readiness of the womb is not something that I agree to. And if that cancels my card, that so be it, because I find it very hypocritical that people who have not themselves married at 15 or 18, when the age of 18 is available to you and you have not married, and you have married at 21, 22, 23 or 26, and then you sit and advocate about people should be allowed to get married at 15, or women are ready to be married. I think that I find that to be hypocritical. So I think I'm answering my friends because they have been furiously sending me messages. Why are not touching this? They want me to be cancelled today.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I just wanted, like, since Kushal is not around, some of the points that he mentioned around whether this will turn out again to be a secular law, if it comes to that. Very clearly, yes. I think even the PCMA Act at this point is not applicable to the Muslim community. while age at consent for boys and girls is clearly established by law to be 18, for members of the Muslim community, age at marriage is when the girl hits puberty. So that could be as early as 13 years of age. And without a universal civil code, I don't think that is going to change. So this is again going to be something that is going to be completely applicable to the Hindu community. I wouldn't say the word burdening the Hindu community, because I do not see it as something which will have net bad repercussions. So I wouldn't say that the Hindu community has to take the burden of this reformation, but certainly it will be applicable. Now, to Kushal's question about whether it serves the purpose of the law, where they want to see firstly maternal mortality or health indicators to see an improvement, then I think one of the big things that the government is pushing is getting more women into the workforce. And does that serve the purpose? It will be an incomplete mission, most certainly. If it is not applicable to all women, then definitely it's not going to serve the purpose. Would I still say this is a big reason for avoiding it? Probably not, because I can still anchor myself to thinking about what the majority number of women here would be Hindu women. And I would be okay if there is a law which is looking at and putting their health and their development first and leaving out others. Ideally, that shouldn't happen. Ideally, members from other communities who are not allowing the certain personal laws to fade into the background and take some of these reforms, put some of these reforms into place, they should be the ones speaking up about it. It should be applicable to all. But I would say I won't hold my breath for that, because there are a number of progressive laws which have not benefited these communities, and Hindu women have benefited from it. So I'm okay with that happening. The issue that people flag a number of times is about the demography change that could happen. So if, say, only Hindu women are allowed to procreate after 21, and other women from other communities are delivering babies from the age of 15 or 14, what does it do to demography? I think that bus has long passed. The total fertility rate for women at present is 2.1. So I think we have already reached a stage where all the long drawn family planning sort of messaging and outreach by the state since the 1970s has borne fruit. So we are seeing total family size being reduced in Hindu families. Women are largely opting for end stage family planning. The problem here, what is happening is the age at first pregnancy and the spacing between two pregnancies. And I'm speaking particularly for Hindu women here, because we've established that it won't be applicable to other communities. So I think this demography fear based on this particular law isn't going to change much. The family size has been established even in rural families. If you go into villages, having families with 4 or 5 children is increasingly a rarity now. And if that is happening, you might expect some kind of other dynamic playing out in the house, where the husband is either abusive, or the husband is sort of a migrant who comes very few times and does not care, or the wife is not being allowed to use contraceptive, because women are largely leading this kind of movement around smaller families. So I don't really think that's a battle we need to fight over this particular law. But yeah, Kushal, to your point about in the larger picture, does it help the government work towards what they are intending to achieve through this? No, I don't think it's possible till they push for a universal civil code.
Yeah, and not only that, I was thinking more from a holistic perspective, that if we look at it in totality, don't you think if you were just looking at results in per capita in totality, and policy should always be aimed at having the highest possible effect in such kinds of a scenario, Pratyasha. So if we're just going to have a scenario where a major chunk of our society is actually not going to be covered under this law, and that chunk of our society is going to have the highest percentile in terms of women being affected by getting married at a young age, then my whole point is that what purpose does it serve? Look, I'm not one of those people who's going to say that, oh, I think it's wonderful that I'm very comfortable in getting my children married as soon as the girls enter the age of puberty. I mean, good for them. I mean, and best of luck to their daughters. But my whole point is completely different here. I have always maintained I'm a libertarian, but I'm not an anarcho-libertarian. Like, I'm not saying state zero, life zero. I'm someone who's very pragmatic in these issues. I believe the state should interfere wherever the harm principle is violated. And the problem with this, Pratyasha, is I agree with you. I would not want to see women not just getting married at the age of 25, मुझे 21, मुझे तो बोलो और आगे होना चाहिए भाई, अपना करियर बनाओ, लाइफ बनाओ, उसके बाद कुछ शादीशुदी की बातें सोचो. मैं तो उस कैटेगरी का हूँ. मगर the point is that, see, Pratyasha, India is a country where the state anyways interferes in our life disproportionately more than we want it to interfere. And we are going on ceding the space. And, when the left agrees with the most, conservative section of the right, I get scared about those kinds of scenarios.
See, but here the left is agreeing with not interfering. So I think the idea for both the non-left and the left, and by the non-left I mean almost like the absolute end of the spectrum, the idea is that for both of them, don't interfere at all. Bring down the age of consent, allow women to get married as early as possible. One, from a perspective of freedom for the girl child, who may even be a minor, and the other from the perspective of saving the girl child from taking decisions that might lead her astray. So, lest she falls in love or lest Romeo gets to her, get her married off. I think I don't know what to like call it. I feel it's fair. I think that they both have points. So it's not we shouldn't be validating or disqualifying these opinions just on the basis of where they are coming from. I get the point when they say that the state might not be able to come and save you when a girl is being threatened in a village, that I'll abduct you, I'll take you away, all of that. And from the left perspective also, I think it's fair when they are saying that a lot of these cases which are being filed are for elopement. I think the solution lies somewhere in between, and this age at marriage thing, it's not going to be easy, because I think, like Padmaji said, there are way too many loopholes. So just to give you like a small example, there is a government mandated position called a CMPO, so Child Marriage Prohibition Officer. They are the nodal points for preventing child marriage, and they are appointed at the district, sub-district level. These CMPOs aren't even full-time, like this is not their full-time job. They are basically working on some other government position, and they are giving additional responsibility of being a CMPO. So imagine, these are the people, when Padmaji is saying how can they get into a live-in sort of a thing where parents are basically treating them as a married couple, but the state isn't recognizing any of their rights, which is a fair point. So tomorrow, a 16-year-old girl says, I am okay with this marriage, she marries, and at 17, her husband dies. She doesn't get anything. She doesn't get inheritance. She doesn't get any legal protection. She's still under like the guardianship of her father. But the marriage was the way society would actually see it. So here, I think the problem that is happening is these CMPOs aren't active. The only point at which they become active is when the parents raise their voice that my girl has run away. Unless these guys become the whistleblowers that the government wants them to be, I don't think the law can be implemented, because every norm, every problematic norm that needs to be broken by a law, the forced measure of that, that process is the whistleblower in the community. Here we won't have whistleblowers because everybody thinks it's desirable for girls to be married at a certain age, or most people think. So you have to get external whistleblowers to do that job. Now, if this whistleblower, like a CMPO, is like a part-time fellow, or a lady who comes in and she's not really interested, and two, three social workers sit and do their negotiation, do something, then I mean, these are the kinds of situations which will arise. So only few cases will be picked up. Those will be cases of elopement, and everybody loses in the end. So yeah, I think it's going to be extremely dicey, and that's why I'm very keen to see what the task force recommends. It's going to be a massive sort of awareness campaign that needs to be built around this, because like I told you, the figures are staggering. 50%, nearly 50% of girls marry before the age of 20. That means you're going to tell 50% of these, like, families with girl children, that it's not okay, and after years of telling them that 18 is okay. So it's not going to be easy. It's going to create a lot of confusion, and at some level the cost benefit of this law needs to be assessed. I probably don't have that much skin in the game, so I'm thinking in a certain way. Once the task force recommendations come in, I think all of us will have fair chance to revisit our positions and come back to the table with what we think. Yeah.
So, Padma, before we wrap things up, I wanted to ask for, closing comments. So, and first of all, apologies to everyone. My whole bloody laptop system, everything crashed. So I apologize for that. Good on the ladies here. They carried on. So everybody on the podcast is now used to it. so, so
I should start my own podcast, Kushal. I'll give you a competition in this business.
yeah, you should. I keep telling everybody to start a podcast anyway. So I convinced Abhinav Prakash to start one. So kudos to me there. Yeah. So Padma, let's start with you now. So because it's already an hour and a half. So what would your closing comments be in this? Look, there are no clear answers. I'm willing to
Yes.
accept that. There are just too many good arguments on every side, and there are no clear answers. But still, if we were to close this topic now, so what would your closing comments be? And then I'll go to Pratyasha.
See, I would say that raising the universal education age, the sponsorship of the state for education is probably going to work out cheaper than interfering into all of this, and also about nutrition, because again, infant mortality and women's health is something that we are just assuming that it will get covered by getting them married late. Women who are already malnourished in their paternal homes are just getting it postponed by 3 years. I do not know the facts of this, but I feel that the state should get into nutrition and education in a much more effective, and probably it should penetrate into the reaches of the country. And I think after this, if the problem is still not solved, is probably what they should look at, certain kind of laws. And I have see, in our caste, before I think probably 1950 and all, we it's a matrilineal caste that I am born in. So none of the women left their maternal homes after marriage. They continue to stay in their maternal homes, and the husbands moved in, or such kind of an arrangement. And I find that that will solve all the problems. So probably my recommendation to the commission is going to be that keep the women in their maternal homes till at least the age of 21, even if you're not raising the marriage age, and if you can legally ensure that the displacement does not happen, because in most societies, the first pregnancies are anyway taken care of by the maternal home. That is a religious thing also. So why not have this rule that you can be married, and but you don't leave your maternal home, and that right is established by the state. So that would be my recommendation. I'm sure it will not be accepted by society as well as by the state, but I would say that this is a best fix for the solution. The woman is married, the legal and the social stamp of marriage, and the societal taboos are being met, yet the woman continues to live in their maternal home, because anyway the father is supposed to provide for sustenance till 21, till even as an unwed daughter. So why not extend that to 21, or things like that? Maybe the state can get in. I would say, if you are thinking of ideas out of the box, why not think of this?
Fair enough. Pratyasha. Pratyasha, you have to unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, not in terms of the recommendation, but in terms of the insight almost that it is that flux, it is that transition from the natal to the marital home that creates a lot of this disbalance. Considering that this and the younger the woman is, the lesser her bargaining power. It's a completely new unit to which she moves, and that creates a lot of problems. So I think that's very well accepted that it is a point of vulnerability. Whether the parents will take on the onus of keeping that like girl for 3 more years, I'm not sure. But I think that's a great point that you brought up. To wind up the discussion, I strongly feel that there is a very strong correlation between age at marriage and particularly adolescent marriage with the first pregnancy, age at first pregnancy, and the subsequent spacing. With when it comes to nutrition also, the flux that Padmaji talked about, transiting to a new household, even if the girl has faced malnutrition in her natal home, exacerbates when she goes into a new household. Drudgery increases, and I'm not generalizing, but these are some of the problems that I'm sure the task force will identify, and if it reaches critical mass, then there is a point to intervene. So the health benefits are, in terms of health outcomes, I think the correlation is very clear. What is very interesting in this mix, and I don't know whether it's talked about much, is that this recommendation has come from the WCD, the Women and Child Development Ministry, and not the Health Ministry. So the Women and Child Development Ministry are looking at it from the perspective of the overall development of the woman, while the Health Ministry is in fact opposed to this move. So I'm not sure it's like official news, but the Health Ministry isn't for it because the Health Ministry believes that if you increase that age to 21, a lot of these girls go out of the realm of reproductive maternal and infant health services. So they will not expand the bracket of reproductive services to somebody who is not married. So what essentially happens is all these services are now available to women above the age of 18, and then now they have to move it to above the age of 21, because the minute you sort of expand reproductive services to women who are not married, you feel like you are incentivizing them to have sex. And this is a problem in our society where most of the issues around sex and sexuality are still largely conservative because that's the social norm. So you can understand that the ministry is not trying to take like these expansion of reproductive services to a younger age group, but in fact is resisting it because they feel that this will skew how the society behaves. So yeah, I think it's very interesting. I look forward to the recommendations of the task force. A lot of the things that we talked about might be discussed in more detail when we hear what Jaya Jaitliji and her team discuss, and hopefully we have enough material to think around it and reverse our opinions. And I think that that should be the way ahead for whoever's listening. Yeah.
All right. So before we wrap things up, my closing comments. Again, I want to begin by saying I'm really sorry about the mishap in between. I try my best, but these live streams are kind of tricky. Sometimes the internet does a number on you, and you have to kind of maneuver around, as they say. So once again, apologize for that. But so every time on the Shastrartha, I try to close the discussion with my views on the subject. And this is one of those rare occasions where I'm genuinely agnostic to the subject. I really don't know. So intuitively, I always say that for me, even 21 is not the right age to get married. If you ask me, you should get married much later in your life. Yeah, I get the biological clock for women and all that, but I believe that if somebody wants to get married in life, the first thing they should do is A, complete an education, be ready with a backup plan for their career if, as they say, shit hits the roof. The biggest problem in this country is that women are not given the opportunity to get educated and really develop those skill sets that are needed. So in that sense, that I don't know what can be the solution, but at the same time, I'm a person who is a firm believer that the state should not interfere in most things. I mean, people were shocked when I put up my stand on Shabrimala and had said that the state should not interfere in Shabrimala, and I had given my reasons at that time, and it was quite shocking for people. अरे ये तो भगवान में नहीं मानता है. He should have been the first person to come and say नहीं नहीं मंदिर का मामला है, उंगली करो जितना कर सकते हो. But no, I'm not actually. I believe the state should interfere in these matters as possible, and I really don't know if the state interferes and makes this age from 18 to 21, what is going to change. I've always wondered when it comes to some things, right? There are things in life, like I don't necessarily think they are the classic case of moral dumbfounding, which is something that Jonathan Haidt talks about. But to me, this is somewhat like moral dumbfounding, where, you say, okay, why is 20 years and 6 months a problem, and 21 suddenly things go fine? Like, I'm morally dumbfounded in these things. I don't know what happens from, like, you can say, yeah, 14 is a clear cut no, even 16 is a clear cut no, but if 18 is okay, why is 17 and a half okay? I'm just putting those thoughts out there. We don't know what's going to happen, and in a country like India, what I've seen is the moment we bring in legislation and we try to legislate things, it tends to disproportionately be misused by a section of the bureaucracy, whether we like it or not. And whether we like it or not, even with the conversion laws, with the so-called love jihad laws. And by the way, I know the church came up with the term love jihad in Kerala. For a change, Hindus did not come up with a terminology. So I don't know why Hindus get shamed for that. By church ka naam lo. But again, the problem is, what will be the disproportionate effect of this kind of a legislation? And again, whether we like it or not, we have to admit this reality, that this is not going to be a universally applicable legislation. Again, it's going to be applicable to only the Hindu section of society. And I agree with Pratyasha that that's not a good enough argument, because ये तो ऐसा हो गया क्योंकि दूसरे लोग डूबे हुए हैं और ये हो रहे हैं, तो भाई हिंदू औरतों को भी डुबो दो उसके साथ. Totally on board on that argument which Pratyasha represents. You cannot justify atrocities on Hindu women because atrocities are happening on other women in India. I would believe that we need to bring Hindu women out of the rut as soon as possible. But whenever we have discussions for these kinds of messy situations, it keeps on coming. What keeps on coming in my mind is there has to be a uniform civil code in India, whether people like it. And I get the opposition to the uniform civil code from certain sections in the Hindu society, because I think they have conflated an attack on rituals with an formulation of a standard law. I think those are two separate issues. The state has nothing to do with your rituals. All the state needs to do is make a uniform law where all women are treated the same, all men are treated the same. What kind of a country do we live in where even to remove something like an instant triple talaq, what people don't realize is what has been made illegal is instant triple talaq. So even the other forms and other things that are there in those marriages are very weird. Now, how many people actually knew that when it comes to, like, I did not know that. Only when I spoke to Nikhil and I did a discussion on the Uniform Civil Code did I realize that one of the toughest things in India is for a Christian woman to get divorced. Who would have known that Christian women can't get divorced in India, and Christian civil laws are a genuine pain in the butt. So we don't know these things, and this is where I say that, again, when it will come to regulating these things, we're going to end up regulating Hindu society, which is not bad in a way. But the point is that when will we have that final push for a uniform civil code in India? What this entire discussion, if you ask me, on the marriage age of women actually brings about it, how woefully inadequate our social messaging is. I still believe this is a social problem where most of it, I think, is going to be solved by the social messaging. I am not entirely convinced that when a state makes a policy, it indicates the intent of the society in every case, because there are many things that the state has done in India which has nothing to do with the intent of the society. The classic being, the state thinks it is okay to control Hindu temples. It is not the intent of the society, in my view. So I don't know that withstands scrutiny every time, but it's a mess. The only thing, these are my last words. If you are, you have children, especially daughters, my only request to you will be, yaar padhao unko. नौकरियां दिलाओ। क्या तमाशा है कि ये दिस माइंडसेट दैट अ फीमेल हैज टू बी मैरिड ऑफ, वो मेरी टेंशन है, वो पता नहीं कौन सी टेंशन देती है। वैसे बूढ़े होते हैं तो हम बच्चे, मर्द तो आदमी तो आता नहीं अपने माँ बाप को संभाल ले, हमेशा एंड में तो औरत ही संभाल रही होती है। एटलीस्ट मेरी लाइफ का तो एक्सपीरियंस यही है कि बेटियां ही माँ बाप को संभालती हैं, बेटे तो ज्यादातर निखेध ही निकलते हैं। मैं खुद हूँ, मैं नहीं हूँ निखेध, मगर पॉइंट है कि मैंने ये देखा हुआ है, और ये भी एक हमारे समाज की रियलिटी है। So my request to each and every one would be, if you are not sure of whether this law should come or not, like in my case, I'm genuinely not sure, and I'll put my hands up. At least be part of a discussion where you can ask all, आपके चाचा चाची, ताया ताई, मामा मामी, फूफा फूफी, कम से कम अगर घर में कजिन्स होंगे या बहनें होंगी, जो भी होंगे, जाके उनको ये तो बोलो कि भाई इतना जल्दी शादी क्यों करा रहे हो, कोई अवार्ड मिलता है क्या शादी कराने से? और अगर इतनी टेंशन होती है तो एक काम करो, उनको मेरे घर में भेज दो, मैं रख लेता हूँ, अगर आपसे अपनी बेटी नहीं संभाली जाती है। So I'll close the discussion today. Once again, I really appreciate Padma and Pratyasha coming over here and giving us multiple perspectives, because this is the whole aim of the podcast and the discussion, getting multiple perspectives out when we don't have definitive answers. Once again, thanks to both of them, and to all of you for watching the podcast and supporting this series and whatever I do. I really want to say thanks a lot. Please subscribe to the podcast, like the videos, share it. I think you should share it if you have female members in the family. I'm sure everybody does, so please share the video and let's see what they say to these kinds of discussions. And if you want to support the podcast, you can become a member on YouTube or subscribe to Patreon. I'll see you next month with another interesting Shastrartha episode, and next week with another podcast. Until then, namaste, take care, see you next time.